The room falls silent. The air inside the glass-walled conference room was heavy, almost suffocating. A dozen of the world's brightest leaders sat around the oval table, waiting for the CEO of Google to speak. Screens glowed with charts, numbers, and slides, but none of that mattered. All eyes were locked on Sundar Pichai, who sat quietly at the head of the table, his fingers resting on the edge of a notebook he had not opened. The sound of the ticking clock on the far wall grew louder, filling the silence that no one dared to break. For years, Sundar had carried himself with calmness, even when storms raged outside. His voice had been a source of stability, his decisions carefully measured, his humility admired by many. But today something was different. His shoulders seemed heavier, his gaze deeper, as though he had been wrestling with something far greater than business strategies or quarterly reports. Finally, Sundar cleared his throat. His voice, soft yet deliberate, cut through the silence. "I have something to tell you," he said, and immediately, every heartbeat in the room seemed to pause. People leaned forward, expecting perhaps an announcement of a new project, a bold acquisition, or a visionary leap into the future. But instead, Sundar uttered words no one in that room expected to hear. "I'm stepping down." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning, echoing in the minds of everyone present. Disbelief spread across faces. A few blinked rapidly, as though they hadn't heard correctly. One executive shifted in her chair, her mouth slightly open. Another tightened his grip on the pen in his hand until it nearly snapped. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was almost painful, as if the walls themselves refused to absorb what had just been said. Then came the whispers, low and nervous. "Stepping down, why? Is he serious? This has to be temporary, right?" But Sundar did not take back his words. He simply looked around the room, his eyes scanning each face with a mixture of sadness and quiet resolve. What no one in that room knew was that Sundar's decision had been building for months, born not out of weakness or failure, but out of something deeply human, something connected to family, to values, to a truth he had kept hidden beneath the surface of board meetings and keynote speeches. The world saw him as the CEO of Google, a man commanding billions in market value, shaping the digital age. But behind that title was a son, a father, and a human being who had learned long ago that success without meaning is nothing more than an empty crown. As the whispers grew louder, Sundar raised his hand gently, signaling for silence. "I know, this comes as a shock," he said. "But I need you to listen before you judge. This isn't about business, and it isn't about strategy. It's about something I can no longer ignore." The room leaned in again, tension climbing like a wave, before it crashes. And just as Sundar was about to reveal the reason, the door to the conference room opened slowly. Standing there was someone no one had expected to see. An elderly woman, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small worn bag. Her presence was so out of place in the high-tech environment that a few executives frowned in confusion. But Sundar froze. His expression softened in an instant. "Amma," he whispered. His mother had walked into the room. The leadership team exchanged startled glances. Many of them had only heard stories of Sundar's humble beginnings in India, of how he grew up in a modest home, sharing one room with his family, sometimes studying by candlelight. And now, here she was, the woman who had raised him, walking quietly into a room full of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. Sundar stood quickly and went to her side. He held her arm gently, helping her to a chair. She looked around the room with eyes that carried both kindness and authority, the kind of presence that made even the most confident executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Amma," Sundar said softly, "you didn't tell me you were coming." She gave a small smile. "Because if I had told you, you would have found a way to stop me." The room was completely silent again. No one dared to interrupt. His mother reached into her worn bag and pulled out something small, something wrapped in cloth. She placed it on the table in front of Sundar and unfolded the fabric. Inside was a thin, yellowed notebook. "Do you remember this?" she asked. Sundar's face changed. His throat tightened. He recognized it instantly. It was the notebook he had used As a boy filled with dreams, sketches, and scribbled ideas, many nights when electricity failed, he had written under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, never imagining that one day he would sit here, in one of the most powerful offices in the world. "I remember," he whispered. His mother's voice grew firm. "Then you also remember what you promised me when you wrote on the first page." Slowly, Sundar opened the notebook. On the very first page, written in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "I will never forget where I came from. Will use what I build to help others live better." He stared at those words for a long time, his chest heavy with emotion. The executives glanced at one another, puzzled, trying to piece together what this meant. Finally, Sundar looked up. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "This is why I'm stepping down," he said. "Because somewhere along the way, I've been pulled too far from this promise, and I need to find my way back." Gasps filled the room. His leadership team could not believe what they were hearing. A CEO walking away from billions, from power, from influence because of a childhood promise? It sounded impossible, but Sundar's eyes showed no hesitation. His mother placed her hand over his. "Sometimes, my son, the hardest choice is the right one." And in that moment, Sundar knew his life was about to change forever. The executive stared at him, torn between disbelief and admiration, waiting for more explanation, waiting for the storm that had only just begun, because they knew one thing. If Sundar Pichai truly walked away, the world would never be the same. The weight of a promise. The conference room remained frozen as though time itself had refused to move forward. Sundar stood beside his mother, his hand still resting on the notebook that carried the words of his childhood. His team of executives, people who controlled entire divisions of the company, sat in stunned silence, unable to process what had just unfolded. One man finally broke the silence. Rajiv, head of global strategy, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Sundar, you can't mean this. Stepping down? Now? We're on the verge of breakthroughs in AI, quantum research, health tech. If you walk away now, everything we've built could crumble. The market will collapse overnight. Investors will panic. This isn't just about you. It's about the future of millions of people." His words carried urgency, almost desperation. But Sundar's gaze didn't shift. Instead, he looked down at the notebook again. The handwriting of his younger self, uneven and shaky, felt heavier now than any document he had signed as CEO. His mother spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension with surprising clarity. "Sometimes people think power is the same as purpose. They are not the same. My son learned purpose long before he ever learned power." The room shifted uncomfortably. They were leaders, used to financial terms and strategic plans, but here sat an elderly woman speaking truths that cut deeper than any market analysis. Sundar finally sat back in his chair, his voice low, carrying the weight of both exhaustion and determination. "For years I convinced myself that staying in this role was my responsibility, that I had to carry this company forward. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself the most important question. Am I still living? By the promise that brought me here?" He paused, his eyes distant as though he were no longer inside the glass-walled conference room, but back in the small, cramped home of his childhood in Chennai. He could almost feel the humid air, hear the faint buzz of the fan that worked only half the time, smell the aroma of his mother's cooking drifting from the kitchen. "I used to sit on the floor with this notebook," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I would write down dreams, not of money, not of power, but of building things that would help others. When I first joined Google, I felt that same fire. Everything we built had meaning. Chrome, Android, the small steps that made technology more accessible to people everywhere. But over the years, that fire has dimmed. I've been in too many meetings about profit margins, too many battles about market share. I've watched as decisions became less about humanity and more about numbers. And each time I stayed silent, I drifted further from this promise." His words sank into the room like stones falling into deep water. "But Sundar," another executive interrupted nervously, "you can't just walk away. If you feel the company is drifting from its mission, you're the only one who can keep it on course." You've always been the anchor. Sundar looked at him, eyes steady. What if I've become the anchor holding it back? A hush swept the room. His mother, still sitting calmly, touched the notebook again. Son, do you remember what happened the night your father's factory closed? Sundar's eyes flickered. He remembered all too well. He was 12. His father had worked tirelessly in a factory that manufactured electrical components, a job that paid little but kept food on the table. One evening, his father came home with slumped shoulders, his eyes heavy with defeat. The factory had shut down. Hundreds of families lost their livelihood overnight. Sundar had watched as neighbors wept, as fathers and mothers argued late into the night about how they would survive, and in that darkness, Sundar had written in his notebook, "One day, I will build something that creates hope, not despair." I remember, he whispered, his voice heavy. That night I understood that technology could be more than circuits and code. It could be a bridge between despair and hope. But somewhere along this journey I stopped crossing that bridge. His leadership team listened, their expressions softening, confusion giving way to something else, empathy, perhaps even guilt. His mother's presence, so unexpected, was peeling away the corporate armor that each of them wore. But then the tension sharpened again. Rajiv spoke once more, his tone urgent. With all respect, Sundar, walking away now won't solve this. The board will see it as abandonment. The media will tear you apart, and your legacy, everything you've built, will be questioned. Are you prepared for that? Sundar turned to him, his eyes calm but unyielding. Legacy means nothing if it isn't honest. Those words struck like lightning. The silence stretched once again. Every executive in the room was processing not only the fate of the company but also the uncomfortable mirror Sundar had placed before them. How many of them had abandoned their own promises? How many had traded purpose for position? And then, suddenly a phone buzzed loudly on the table, breaking the moment. Everyone turned. It was the chief financial officer's device, flashing with a notification. He glanced at it, his face draining of color. "You need to see this," he said, his voice trembling. He turned the phone toward the group. On the screen was a breaking news alert. The headline read, "Insider leaks claim Sundar Pichai is resigning as Google CEO. Stock prices begin to tumble." Gasps erupted around the room. Executives grabbed their devices, refreshing feeds, checking updates. It was chaos. Just minutes after Sundar had spoken his truth in the privacy of the room, the outside world already knew. His mother looked at him quietly, almost knowingly, as if she had seen this storm coming long before he did. The leadership team stared at Sundar, waiting for him to respond, waiting to see if he would deny it, spin it, or backtrack. But Sundar remained still. His eyes, however, carried a flicker of something new, something that felt both dangerous and liberating. He whispered only one line, "Then it begins." The storm outside, the glass walls of the conference room were no longer a shield. They felt like transparent prison bars, trapping everyone inside as the storm outside grew louder. Notifications buzzed across every executive's phone. Some tried to remain composed, but the flicker of panic in their eyes betrayed them. Within minutes, news anchors across the world were already broadcasting the story. Google's CEO stepping down. The stock ticker at the bottom of every financial channel glowed red, numbers sliding downward, billions vanishing into the air like dust. Rajiv slammed his phone onto the table, his face pale. It's everywhere already. Wall Street, London, Tokyo. They're all reacting. The board hasn't even approved anything, and yet the world thinks you're gone, Sundar. Others murmured in disbelief. The chief marketing officer scrolled furiously through Twitter feeds, her voice sharp with fear. They're calling this the Pichai crash. Look at these headlines. Google in freefall. CEO abandons ship in critical AI race. If we don't respond within the hour, this could turn into a collapse. The weight of those words pressed against the room. These were people who had dedicated years to building stability, now watching their empire tremble in real time. Yet, Sundar, sitting with his mother beside him, didn't flinch at the chaos. He stared at the notebook once more, his fingers brushing its worn cover as though drawing strength from it. The world will always panic when it doesn't understand, he said softly. But sometimes panic is the first step to truth. His calmness both unsettled and angered some of his executives. Truth, Rajiv snapped. Truth won't protect the thousands of employees whose jobs are on the line if this continues. Truth won't stop the shareholders from tearing us apart. In the next meeting, Sundar, we need to control the narrative before it destroys everything. His mother turned to him gently, her expression wise. You knew this storm would come, didn't you? Sundar nodded slowly. I didn't know it would be this fast. But yes, I knew. The chief legal officer spoke next, her tone urgent, but composed. We need to act immediately. Deny the leak, issue a statement, calm the market. We can still contain this before it spirals further. But Sundar shook his head. And what would that solve? Another lie? Another mask to protect the image while the promise dies quietly inside me? No. If this has reached the world, then maybe it's time they know the truth too. The words stung. Half the room stared at him in disbelief, the other half in awe. The chief technology officer leaned forward, his voice trembling. Sundar, listen to me. I grew up in a small home too. I know what promises mean, but you don't just carry your own dreams anymore. You carry the dreams of hundreds of thousands of people across this company. If you step down now, what happens to them? His question lingered heavily. Even Sundar's mother looked at him, her expression unreadable. Sundar inhaled deeply, his voice softer this time. I don't have that answer yet, but I do know this. Staying in this seat without purpose is no gift to them either. Outside the conference room, voices grew louder. Staff in the hallway were already gathering, phones in hand, whispers spreading like wildfire. The rumor had escaped containment, and now it was shaping into a tidal wave that could not be stopped. The CFO received another alert and gasped. We've lost $17 billion in valuation in the last half hour. The room erupted. Voices clashed, arguments broke out. Some demanded immediate damage control. Others questioned who had leaked the information. Suspicion spread like smoke. Was it someone inside this very room? Enough. Sundar's voice cut sharply through the noise. It wasn't loud, but the firmness in his tone silenced everyone. This isn't about numbers. This isn't about panic. This is about remembering who we are and why we started. If the company cannot survive without clinging to me, then maybe we've built something weaker than we thought. His words pierced the air. His mother placed her hand on his arm, grounding him. Son, she whispered, when the fire burns too hot, it does not ask if you are ready. It only asks if you are true. And then, just as her words settled, the door burst open again. A young assistant, out of breath, stepped inside holding a tablet. Sir, you need to see this immediately. He placed the tablet on the table. The screen showed live footage. Reporters gathered outside Google headquarters, their cameras flashing. But it wasn't the media that froze everyone's blood. The footage shifted to a massive crowd forming online. Tens of thousands of employees had already joined an internal forum thread titled, What Happens If Sundar Leaves? Comments filled the screen. Some begged him to stay. Others expressed anger, fear, or betrayal, and a few quietly but powerfully wrote messages of support. If he's leaving for his values, maybe we should listen. The divide was already clear. A storm was not just brewing outside, it was brewing inside the very heart of the company. Sundar leaned closer, reading the messages, his face unreadable. Finally, he looked up at his leadership team and whispered, This is only the beginning. The real battle won't be with the world out there. It will be with the people in here. And before anyone could respond, another alert appeared on the tablet. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting. The boardroom fire. The emergency meeting was called faster than anyone expected. Within 45 minutes, Sundar was ushered into a different room. Smaller, darker, with walls that seemed to carry the weight of decades of decisions. The board of directors had assembled, their faces appearing both in person and across glowing screens mounted along the wall. These were people who rarely displayed emotion, yet today their expressions carried a sharp edge, the look of those who felt blindsided and betrayed. The moment Sundar entered, The questions began. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded one director, her tone cold, each word clipped with authority. "Resigning without consultation? Do you understand the damage you've already caused?" Another voice, older, gravelly, followed quickly. "Billions lost in valuation in less than an hour. Investors calling nonstop. Employees in panic. What exactly are you thinking, Sundar? Is this some kind of negotiation tactic?" Their words fell like hammers, but Sundar did not flinch. He had faced pressure before. Governments, Congress hearings, global crises. But this was different. This was personal. His mother sat quietly in the corner of the room, unnoticed by most of them at first. She carried no device, no documents, only her presence, calm yet firm, as though she was there not to be convinced but to witness whether her son would stand by his promise. "This is not a tactic," Sundar began slowly, his voice even. "This is a decision I've wrestled with for months. I came into this role with a promise to never lose sight of why I started. But lately, I've felt that promise slipping away. I cannot continue to lead if I'm betraying the very values that brought me here." The board erupted. Half a dozen voices spoke over each other, their disbelief echoing through the room. "Values?" one director scoffed. "This company doesn't run on values, it runs on markets, on technology, on innovation. You're not a philosopher, Sundar, you're a CEO. And if you can't handle that, maybe you're right to walk away. But you will. Destroy everything on your way out." "He's risking the company's future over sentiment," another muttered bitterly. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment, the noise pressing against him like crashing waves. He remembered nights from his childhood again, nights when he studied by candlelight, when his father told him that real strength was not in building machines, but in building lives. When he opened his eyes, his voice was steadier, stronger. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "Companies do run on values. Without them, technology becomes a weapon. Without them, innovation becomes greed. Without them, we may grow richer, but the world grows poorer." A hush fell over the room. Some directors shifted uncomfortably. Others rolled their eyes. But none could ignore the conviction in his voice. Then came the chairman of the board, a man known for his silence until the decisive moment. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Sundar, listen carefully. You cannot simply leave. Contracts bind you. Obligations tie you. If you step down, the chaos will be written as your failure, not your sacrifice. Are you prepared for history? To remember you not as the builder, but as the one who abandoned his creation?" The words hung heavy. They weren't just an argument. They were a threat. Sundar felt his mother's gaze on him. He turned slightly, and she gave a slow, deliberate nod. A reminder that history written by others means nothing if you've betrayed yourself. He breathed deeply. "If the cost of keeping my title is losing myself, then yes, I will accept whatever history writes about me. But I will not abandon my promise." A collective gasp followed. The directors looked at one another, realizing that the CEO they had once considered calm and agreeable was now drawing a line that could not be erased. Just then, the CFO entered the room, pale and shaking. He held a tablet close to his chest. "There's something you all need to see," he said, his voice trembling. He placed it on the table. The screen displayed live footage. Not from news outlets this time, but from inside the company itself, across multiple offices worldwide. Employees had begun gathering in protest. They were holding signs, chanting, demanding clarity. Some signs read, "Sundar, stay with us." Others read, "We want purpose, not panic." But it was the third category of signs that sent chills through the board. "We walk out if he walks out." The room fell dead silent. It was no longer just about stock prices, no longer just about shareholders. This was about people, the very heart of Google, standing on the edge of rebellion. The chairman's face darkened, his voice low and dangerous. "You see what you've done, Sundar? You've lit a fire you cannot control." Sundar looked at the footage, his throat tightening. He had known his decision would shake the company, but he hadn't imagined employees around the globe standing up in solidarity, willing to risk their jobs for his choice. he whispered, almost to himself. Maybe. The fire was always there, waiting for someone to light it. His mother's eyes glistened with quiet pride. The board members exchanged frantic looks, whispering among themselves, fear in their voices. They could see it now. This wasn't just one man resigning. This was a movement forming, and if mishandled, it could consume them all. The chairman leaned forward once more. You need to put this fire out now. Issue a statement denying everything. Calm them, or this company will burn. All eyes turned to Sundar, waiting for his answer. He looked down at the notebook before him, then at the footage of his employees on the screen. His jaw tightened. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried the weight of finality. I will not lie. The room froze. And in that silence, the sound of a notification buzzed again. The tablet lit up with one more update. Government. Officials have requested an urgent meeting with Sundar Pichai regarding his resignation, citing national security concerns. Gasps filled the room. National security. This was bigger than shareholders, bigger than markets. The resignation of Google's CEO was now a matter of global consequence. Sundar closed his eyes, realizing the storm had just grown far beyond anything he had prepared for. The world is watching. The corridors outside the boardroom buzzed like a beehive. Phones rang endlessly. Staff hurried with frantic steps. Security tightened around the building. The resignation of Sundar Pichai was no longer an internal crisis. It had become an international headline. An aide rushed toward Sundar, breathless. Sir, Washington is on the line. They're demanding a closed-door session immediately. London and Brussels have also requested emergency discussions. They say your departure has implications on global stability. The words struck the executives like a hammer. Global stability. Few CEOs in history had ever reached the point where their personal choices could ripple into the political fabric of nations. But Sundar had. The board members scrambled, whispering, calculating damage control strategies. The chairman barked orders. Connect him now, we can't waste another second. Within minutes, the screens in the boardroom flickered again, this time showing the stern faces of government officials. Flags lined the backgrounds of their offices. Their voices carried urgency, almost bordering on command. Mr. Pichai, one official began sharply. We need immediate clarity. Your rumored resignation has already triggered volatility across multiple sectors. Banking, defense, communications, they all rely on Google's systems. Your exit is not just a corporate issue. It is a matter of national security. Another added, adversaries are already moving. Cyber attacks are spiking. The very hint of your resignation has emboldened them. If you confirm this publicly, we could see waves of attacks, market crashes, even social unrest. Are you prepared to carry that responsibility? The room grew colder. Sundar's mother, still seated quietly in the corner, watched him with eyes that seemed to pierce through the noise, reminding him silently of the promise in the notebook. Sundar leaned forward, his voice steady. With respect, I cannot live a life chained by fear. If this company's stability depends entirely on me, then it means we have failed to build resilience. The answer to global security cannot be one man's refusal to step down. It has to be systems, values, and leaders who put purpose above profit. The officials were not impressed. Idealism will not stop hackers, Mr. Pichai, nor will it comfort families if economies collapse tomorrow. You must understand, the world does not have time for your personal crisis of values. A painful silence followed. Everyone in the room felt the weight of the words. Sundar's resignation was no longer his alone. It threatened to unravel the very fabric of trust between technology and society. The chairman seized the moment, leaning in, his voice dripping with authority. Sundar, this has gone far enough. If you will not step back from this path, then the board will be forced to act without you. We will vote you out, strip you of authority, and take control of the narrative ourselves. You will leave in disgrace, and your promise will die with you. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sundar's team of executives looked torn, some glaring at him in anger, others silently pleading for him to find a middle ground. His mother, however, broke the silence. Her voice, soft but unshakable, echoed across the boardroom. They speak of disgrace as if it comes from losing power. But disgrace comes from losing yourself. Everyone turned to her. She was not a board member, not a politician, not a shareholder. Just an elderly woman who had lived in humility her whole life. Yet in that moment, her words carried more weight than any financial chart or political warning. Sundar closed his eyes, her words igniting the same fire he had once felt as a boy in Chennai, scribbling in his notebook by candlelight. He turned back to the board and the officials on screen. "I understand your fears," he said quietly, but his voice grew stronger with each word. "But I will not sacrifice truth for comfort. If my stepping down forces the world to confront its dependence on one man, then perhaps that confrontation is necessary. Perhaps only through the storm can we build something stronger." The board members erupted again, shouting, warning, bargaining. The officials grew sharper, their voices filled with alarm. Sundar stood motionless, letting the chaos swirl around him, and then, suddenly another notification appeared on the tablet. This one was different, not from news, not from employees, not from governments. It was a video. The subject line read, "Message from the employees of Google, sent to Sundar." The CFO hesitated, then pressed play. The boardroom fell silent as the screen filled with the faces of employees from every corner of the world. Engineers, designers, janitors, cafeteria workers, security guards, all holding up signs, speaking in shaky voices. "You taught us purpose," said one. "You showed us humility," said another. "Don't give up on your promise because we believe in it too," added a third. Voice after voice echoed, from India to Africa to Europe to the Americas. Some cried, some smiled, but all carried the same message. They stood with him. Sundar's throat tightened. His hands trembled as he gripped the notebook. The fire inside him no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a calling. But then, just as the video ended, another alert flashed across the screen. This one wasn't supportive. It was a threat. Anonymous hackers claim they will shut down Google's global servers within 24 hours if Sundar Pichai resigns. The boardroom exploded into chaos. Shouts, fear, panic. Governments demanded answers. Executives argued furiously. Sundar's mother looked at him, her face pale, but her eyes steady. The storm had reached its peak. Now the world wasn't just watching. It was holding its breath. And Sundar knew the next choice he made would not only decide his future, but possibly the future of billions. The choice, the boardroom had become unbearable. The air was thick with shouts, overlapping voices and raw panic. Screens flashed red with urgent headlines. Government officials barked warnings. The board demanded obedience. Employees around the world held signs of solidarity. And now, anonymous hackers had thrown fuel onto the fire, threatening to bring down the very infrastructure of the internet if Sundar walked away. All eyes turned to him, waiting, desperate. Sundar Pichai sat motionless at the head of the table, the worn notebook lying open before him. He ran his fingers over the faded words of his childhood promise as if searching for strength buried deep within the paper. His mother's quiet presence steadied him. She did not speak, but her eyes reminded him of late nights under candlelight, of her sacrifices, of his father's weary hands after long shifts at the factory. Everything he was came from them. Every dream he had built came from those humble roots. And he knew that whatever choice he made now had to honor that origin. Finally, Sundar rose to his feet. The room fell instantly silent. Even the officials on the screens paused, sensing that what he was about to say could alter the course of events far beyond these walls. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the power in it. "I have heard your fears. I have seen the panic, and I have felt the weight of this moment pressing on all of us. But I cannot be held hostage by fear, whether it comes from shareholders, governments, or hackers hiding in the dark. My promise has always been simple: to build in a way that uplifts humanity, not enslaves it. If I abandon that now, then I lose myself. And if I lose myself, I lose everything." A director slammed his fist on the table. And what of the billions at stake? What of the chaos your resignation will cause? Sundar's gaze did not waver. Chaos is not caused by truth. It is revealed by it. If one man stepping aside can bring the world to its knees, then the system we've built was fragile from the beginning. Maybe it is time we see that fragility and fix it. His words hung heavy, a challenge that none dared to answer. He turned to the screens where the officials glared at him. You speak of national security, but security built on silence, on dependence, is not security at all. It is illusion. True security is resilience, systems that survive beyond one leader. If my resignation forces the world to build such systems, then perhaps it is the most important act of leadership I can offer. The silence was suffocating. Even the most hardened directors seemed shaken, unsure if they were watching a man destroy himself or rise into something greater. Then Sundar reached for the notebook. He lifted it high enough for everyone in the room to see, his childhood handwriting visible on the first page. This promise has guided me since I was a boy. I will never forget where I came from, and I will use what I build to help others live better. I cannot betray this. So yes, I am stepping down. Gasps filled the room. Some board members shouted in anger. Officials cursed under their breath, but Sundar's voice cut through them all. My resignation will not be the end of Google. It will be the beginning of a new chapter, one where leadership is not a crown worn by a single head, but a fire shared by many. His mother stood, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. Her eyes glistened with quiet pride. You have chosen truth, my son. That is all a mother could ask. As she spoke, the screens flickered again. Live footage from outside Google headquarters appeared. Thousands of employees had gathered, chanting his name, not in desperation, but in unity. Signs waved through the crowd. Purpose before profit. We are the promise. We are not afraid. The sight moved Sundar to his core. It was no longer about him, it was about them, about people everywhere remembering that power begins not in boardrooms but in hearts. But just as hope began to rise, the final test arrived. Alarms blared across the boardroom. The CTO shouted, "Servers are under attack. The hackers are making good on their threat." Screens flashed red. Graphs showed systems being targeted. Chaos erupted again, but Sundar did not panic. He stepped forward, calm, commanding. Shut down external lines. Reroute through the backup infrastructure we built last year. Isolate critical systems. We prepared for this. The engineers scrambled, following his instructions. Within minutes, the waves of attack slowed, blocked, deflected. The room watched in stunned silence as the company's defenses held. Sundar exhaled slowly. You see? Resilience. We never needed fear to protect us. We only needed trust in what we had already built. The alarms quieted. The screens returned to normal. The storm was over. He turned back to the board. My resignation stands, but so does my belief that this company and this world can survive without clinging to one man. It's time to prove it. His mother smiled through tears. The board sat in silence, defeated yet awed. The officials, still watching, had no words. Sundar placed the notebook carefully back into his mother's hands. It's time to go, he whispered. Together they walked out of the boardroom. Outside the building, thousands of employees erupted into cheers and chants, not of despair, but of unity. Cameras flashed, the world watched, and history was written. In that moment, not of a CEO abandoning his post, but of a man who chose promise over power. As Sundar stood before the crowd, he raised his hand and spoke one final line that echoed across the globe. The greatest legacy is not the empire you build, but the truth you leave behind. The crowd roared, voices rising into the sky. And for the first time in years, Sundar felt free, not as a CEO, but as a man who had kept his promise.